Who was Søren Kierkegaard? In order to answer this question, we will observe his philosophical goal, his personal life, and his famous work, Attack on Christendom. So first, let's look at Kierkegaard's philosophical goals. Kierkegaard has been called a philosopher, a theologian, the father of existentialism, both atheistic and theistic versions, a literary critic, a social theorist, a humorist, a psychologist, and a poet. Two of his most influential ideas are subjectivity and the notion popularly referred to as leap of faith. The philosophical musings of Kierkegaard involves his religion, Christianity, and with it, the concept of blind belief. The leap of faith is his conception of how an individual would believe in God or how a person would act in love. Faith is not a decision based on evidence, say, certain beliefs about God are true or a certain person is worthy of love. He argues no such evidence could ever be enough to pragmatically justify the kind of total commitment involved in true religious faith or romantic love, though faith involves that kind of commitment anyway. Kierkegaard thought to have faith is to at the same time have doubt. So, for example, for one to truly have faith in God, one would also have to doubt one's belief about God. The doubt is a rational part of a person's thought, involved in weighing evidence, without which faith would have no real substance. As Kierkegaard writes, doubt is conquered by faith, just as it is faith which has brought doubt into the world. Kierkegaard also stressed the importance of self, and the self's relation to the world, as being grounded in self-reflection and introspection. He argued in Concluding Unscientific Postscript for Philosophical Fragments that subjectivity is truth and truth is subjectivity. This has to do with a distinction between what is objectively true and an individual-subject relation, such as indifference or commitment to that of truth. People who in the same sense believe that the same thing may relate to those beliefs quite differently. Kierkegaard primarily discusses subjectivity with regards to religious matters. The most one could hope for would be the conclusion that it is probable that Christian doctrines are true. But if a person were to believe in such doctrines only to a degree that seems likely to be true, he or she would not be genuinely religious at all. Faith consists in subjective relation of absolute commitment to these doctrines. Next, let's discuss his life. Søren Kierkegaard was born to an affluent family in Copenhagen. His mother, Anne Kierkegaard, had served as a maid in the household before marrying his father, Michael Kierkegaard. She was an unassuming figure, quiet, plain, and not formally educated. His father was a very stern man, to all appearances dry and prosaic, but under his rustic cloak manner, he concealed an ardent imagination which not even his great age could blunt. Kierkegaard attended the School of Civic Virtue in 1830, and when the school was situated in Clairvaux, when he studied Latin and history among other subjects. He went on to study theology at the University of Copenhagen, but he was never interested in historical works. Philosophy dissatisfied him, and he couldn't see dedicating himself to speculation. He said, "What I really need to do is get a clear about what I am to do, or what I must know." He wanted to lead a complete human life, and not merely one of knowledge. Kierkegaard didn't want to be a philosopher in the traditional or the Heideggerian sense. He didn't want to preach a Christianity that was an illusion. And in 1837, he pursued Regine Olsen, his future fiancée, but future ex-lover. The breaking of the engagement between Regine Olsen and Kierkegaard would influence his later work. An interesting fact about Søren is found from the quote from his brother. "I found his appearance almost comical. He was then 23 years old. He had something quite irregular in his entire form and a strange coiffure. His hair rose about 6 inches above his forehead and a tousled crest that gave him a strange, bewildered look. a visage I believe Albert Einstein's would approve. Finally, let's get to his famous work. According to Samuel Hugo Brigham, Kierkegaard's journals are one of the most important sources of understanding his philosophy. Kierkegaard wrote over 7,000 pages in his journals on events, musings, and thoughts about his work and everyday remarks. The entire collection of Danish journals has been edited, published in 13 volumes, which consists of 25 separate bindings, including indices. The first English edition of the journals was edited by Alexander Drew in 1938. The style is literary and poetic in a manner. Kierkegaard saw his journals as his legacy. But don't worry, we'll be focusing on a more specific set of works, called The Attack upon Christendom. Kierkegaard's final years were taken up with a sustained, outright attack on the Church of Denmark by the means of newspaper articles published in the Fatherland, and a series of self-published pamphlets called The Monument. These pamphlets are now included in Kierkegaard's Attack upon Christendom. Kierkegaard's first movement to action against Professor Hans Martensen gave a speech in a church where he called the recently deceased Bishop Jacob Mastera a true witness, one of the authentic truth witnesses. Kierkegaard explained in his first article that Mastera's death permitted him at last to be frank about his opinions. He later wrote that his former output had been preparations for this attack and postponed for years of waiting for two preconditions. 1. Both his father and Bishop Meister should be dead before the attack. And 2. He himself should be acquired a name as famous theological writer. Kierkegaard's father had been Münster's close friend, but Soren had long come to see Münster's conception of Christianity was mistaken, demanding too little of its adherents. Kierkegaard strongly objected to the portrayal of Münster as a truth witness. During the 10 issues of the movement, the aggressiveness of Kierkegaard's language increased. The thousands of Danish priests playing Christianity were eventually called man-eaters, after being called liars, hypocrites, and destroyers of Christianity in the first issue. This verbal violence caused a sensation in Denmark, but today, Kierkegaard is often considered to have lost control of himself during this campaign. The importance of the works that I have read, called The Moment, which is included in Kierkegaard's Attack upon Christendom, is Kierkegaard's last movement against the leap of faith. Kierkegaard's core belief is the system of the leap of faith should be ignored. That this leap of faith, because it is a blind following of belief, is irrational because no doubt is involved. This final attack on the church is the epitome of Kierkegaard's work. This leap of faith is something that is to be frowned upon and is within the Kierkegaard movement. I think Kierkegaard's discussion on the leap of faith and I believe Kierkegaard's discussion on the leap of faith and how faith is to have doubt is relevant for any time period. Because nowadays, we have grown too accustomed to the traditions of the church and faith. With this ideology, we should be able to progress philosophically and bring about discussions of tolerance. This, coupled with his message of existentialism, I would recommend this philosopher to anyone.